Hello there, and thank you for being brave enough or stupid enough to join me for this adventure, this decentering practice that is called Atheism for Lent. Now, what I want to do is just kind of welcome you to this, give you a little bit of an overview of what we'll be doing. I want to look at why the course this year is called Invasion of the Dialectics. I want to introduce a few of the readings that you'll be doing over the next few days and just basically give a few pieces of advice. So what is Atheism for Lent? Well, Atheism for Lent is a great example of the power of dialectics. I've called this year Invasion of the Dialectics, but in a sense that's what atheism is. So I'm just going to explain what dialectics is very briefly, give you a sense for it. But sometimes it's better experienced than taught. And what you're going to experience over these 40 days is a type of dialectic process. At least I hope that is the case. But I'll try and set it up a little bit. So basically a dialectic is a form of thinking. Dialectics is a form of thought, a movement in which a person begins somewhere. We all begin somewhere in time, in history, with a language, with a certain background, etc., etc. And what we do is we can either wholeheartedly embrace that position and believe that what we have is completely true, that the way we're brought up just happens to be an insight into reality itself, right? That we were lucky enough to be born into the correct worldview. Or we can reject it at a certain point, maybe when we're an adolescent, maybe turning away from the tradition that we were brought up in. And both of these are common ways of responding to our traditions. One Paul Tillich called the unbroken myth, which basically means we take our story about the universe, why we're here, where we're going, what the purpose of life is, and we fully embrace it and believe it, and we double down on it. And then on the other side is it's critiqued. Somebody starts to poke holes in it, or we start to poke holes in it, and we reject it for some other story, another unbroken myth. Now, Tillich himself says that unbroken myths are very common. There's nothing wrong with having one. Of course, you start off with life believing what you're told. You just take it for granted that your parents are godlike figures. They wouldn't lie to you. They have some great insight into the world. And so it's very natural for us just to assume that what we have been given in terms of politics, cultural understanding, religion, is the truth. But as we start to get older and start to think for ourselves, there inevitably comes a point when we start to see cracks in the positions that we take. Perhaps it's because we are seeing those cracks, or we meet somebody who thinks differently from us, but something happens in which we start to wonder if perhaps what we believe is the truth. And at that point, we can do one of two things. One thing we can do is try to close our ears, not listen to the doubts and the questions, double down into our beliefs. And the other is to open ourselves up to them, to listen to them, to see where they will take us. For Tillich, fundamentalism isn't actually the embrace of your unbroken myth. Fundamentalism, as we understand the term today, is more about the point when you're confronted with the possibility that your beliefs are wrong, that your way of seeing the world is wrong, and you close your ears to it. It's not that you just have not considered that you might be wrong. It's that actually you've been confronted with that possibility and you have fled from it, you have repressed it in some kind of way. Now, dialectics is a type of thought that doesn't either wholeheartedly embrace the story that you're brought up with, nor does it wholeheartedly reject it and try to find some other way of seeing the world. In dialectics, the idea is that you go as deep as you can into the the political, cultural, or religious perspectives that you have at hand, the language you've been given, the books that you've been read. You take that as your starting point, because that's where you have to start. You can't start somewhere else. You take that as your starting point, you take it seriously, and you go as deep into it as you can. And the idea is that as you go deeply into your tradition, you will find that at certain points it begins to become ambiguous. Questions begin to arise. There are contradictions. There are problems. There are fissures in that whole world of thinking. And those cracks don't appear because you don't take your position seriously. They actually appear because you take it very seriously. People who don't think that much about their religious background, the church that they go to, or their political views, they often don't see these contradictions. They don't see these problems. They actually think that their position is very coherent, that it works, that it is just an expression of reality. But when you go deeply into it, you will find all of these complexities. And that opens up a lot of questions. It opens up doubt. It opens up the possibility of your entire world beginning to collapse. Now, at this stage, you have two opportunities in front of you. You can either, as I said previously there, double down, avoid the contradictions, avoid the questions and the complexities, and go back to a very simple way of conceiving the world, or an apologetic form where you try to find ways to justify your position, to cover over the questions and the doubts and the uncertainties. Or you can go more deeply into them. You can take that journey into the cracks. And that is part of what dialectics is. It's always the choice for the wrong. You could call it the heretical imperative. And it's the heretical imperative because when you're faced with the choice of either staying with the orthodoxy or going into this kind of heresy, these questions and these doubts and the problems within your position, dialectics says you go there. Whenever you're confronted with the right choice and the wrong choice, you go for the wrong choice, right? Basically, we as human beings, when we're confronted with the right choice and the wrong choice, we try to go for the right choice. Or we see that actually they're both held together by something deeper. Dialectics, which comes really from the philosopher Hegel, but who felt that it was expressed within Christianity and goes right back to the Greek philosophers. So it is a way of thinking that has really been there from the beginning of philosophy, but that you see very strongly within Christianity. Is this choice for the worse, choice for the heresy, choice for the thing that you shouldn't go down, basically the narrow path rather than the broad path, death instead of life, the questioning instead of the certainty. And then the notion is this, that as you go into that place of darkness, the cloud of unknowing, as it's often called, the place of doubt, the place of questioning, the place of suffering, you will find that what you have left behind is reinvigorated. You rediscover it in a new way. So as you, in one sense, go from certainty into uncertainty, you find that as you delve into the questions, you find a peace and a conviction that is almost more certain than what you left behind. Because, of course, so much certainty is veiled uncertainty. The more someone fights for a perspective and gets angry about it, that is often a hint that they're very insecure about that position. So dialectics then, as I've described it, has a few different parts. The first is you take your position, whatever it is, whatever philosophical, political, religious position you have, you take it seriously. Go deep into it, read about it, reflect about it, think about it. Then secondly, that will open up questions and contradictions and problems. And choose those, go into them, be courageous enough to go into those places of questioning. And then the third part of dialectics is the idea that as you do that, you will expand your mind, expand your horizon, and you will get to a new place. But that new place will have somehow brought with it what you left behind. And in philosophy, this is called thesis, antithesis, and it's often called synthesis. A better way of saying it, to be honest, is an affirmation, a negation, and then a negation of negation. So for example, you believe in God, but as you take the notion of God absolutely seriously and you think about what that word means, you start to find contradictions, you start to find problems, you start to find that the way you conceive of God doesn't make sense all the time. So then you go into a negation where you say God does not exist, at least the God that I believed in doesn't exist. But then as you delve deeper into that place of denial and doubt and negation, you get beyond that to a place where you may find that you can reuse the word God, maybe in a way that is post-theistic even, or in a way that doesn't fit neatly into religious categories. So that's a type of dialectics. What I want to do now very quickly is just give you some very mundane examples of how this works. Just this morning I met with two very good friends, one of whom is a retired police inspector. He's also into real estate now. And we were talking about atheism for Lent. And he was saying that as a police inspector, he was always looking for the anomaly, the little thing in the person's story that doesn't make sense. We were talking actually about someone who pretended to have been attacked and how the story began to unravel. And he said that as soon as he heard the story, he thought that there was a problem with it. He saw a little thread, a little crack. And he said that his 20 years as a police inspector taught him to go to the crack, not to be taken up by the whole story, but by looking for the little thing that doesn't seem to fit. And you see this in police dramas. My favourite detective in television history is Columbo. And Columbo does this. He comes on the scene, he sees a murder has happened, he sees the story that the murderer wants to tell. Right? There's a person who is dead in their office, their house caught fire. This person was a smoker, smoked 20 cigarettes a day, and they find that one of these cigarettes that was in the office fell out of an ashtray, hit the curtains and set the whole place on fire. Right? So that's the obvious story. But then Columbo looks around and he picks up a cigarette and he notices that on the end of the cigarette, at the bit where you suck, there's no tar, there's no stain. And he thinks to himself that when you smoke a cigarette and you suck the smoke through the filter, a little stain is left. And he's wondering why some of these cigarettes in the office don't have a stain. And he realizes that someone who's not a smoker has come in and lit cigarettes to make it look like this guy was smoking and then set fire to the building. What Columbo's looking for is that one tiny stain in the story, that one thing that just doesn't quite fit. And as he goes into that, the truth begins to reveal itself. Another example actually from the same friend, because he was talking about then as someone who buys property, how when he goes into a house, he has to not be taken in by all of the new carpets, the nice smell, maybe they've got coffee brewing, the fact that maybe it's been repainted, right? All of the stuff that I would just see, he's not looking for. He's looking for the tiny crack in the wall, or a small stain in the corner, or a flickering light. Some small anomaly that speaks of a fundamental problem that wouldn't otherwise be seen. And the reason why he's done well in real estate is because he is able to not get carried away by what you see, but rather train himself, because he was a police officer and he was doing this for a job, train himself to see the small anomaly and then to go into that anomaly to explore it, because it's the anomaly that expresses the truth. This is the same in psychoanalysis, where the analyst isn't really that interested in what you're saying. You might go in and talk all about your week and your relationship with your mother, your father, and your partner, or whatever. What the therapist or the analyst is really looking for is the point when you hesitate, or you make a mistake, or you use the wrong name, or you forget something, right? What's called the parapraxis. It's a praxis, as in it's an action that you do, but it's a para-action, i.e. it's outside of the authority of your conscious. Just like a paramilitary organization is outside the authority of the military. A parapraxis is outside the authority of your consciousness. And they go into that. Why did you use your mum's name whenever you were thinking about your partner? What does that mean, right? So it's the little mistake that is the royal road to transformation. A similar idea in therapy, particularly counselling, is somebody comes because they're suffering, they're in pain. They're living their life, they've taken their life seriously, and they have confronted trauma. And so they go into therapy because they want to escape that trauma. They want to get everything back to normal. But the therapist is there to help push you into your trauma. You're there saying, behind that door is all of this suffering, or these monsters, or these things that want to devour me in my life. And I feel that those tentacles of those monsters are reaching around the door and coming out to grab me. And I want you to help me shut the door. And what does a therapist do? They open the door and they push you in. Because the idea is you take the wrong decision. The wrong decision is to go into your suffering, to tarry with it, to confront it, with the belief that that movement will actually produce transformation and change in your life. One more example of the dialectic move in everyday life would be Alcoholics Anonymous, where someone goes to AA every week, and maybe they haven't fully confronted the fact that they're an alcoholic. So they go there, they listen, they don't participate. But eventually one week they speak. And they say what everybody at AA says. They say their name and they say that they're an alcoholic. They admit to who they are and what they are in a community of grace that accepts them for that. What the alcoholics probably been doing up until then has been trying to run from that acknowledgement. I'm not an alcoholic. I could give up any time I want. This is not really a problem. But now the dialectic move is, no, you have to go into the darkness. You have to go into that difficult place, not so that you despair, but so that you can find a way to move beyond it. The only way beyond is into. In order to find life, you have to lose it. That's the dialectic move. And so what is atheism for Lent then? Well, in a narrow sense, it started off as the idea that for people who, and all of us have to a certain extent, grown up within religious traditions, to start to question those, to allow space for the doubts that we have, to allow space for the questioning, to open ourselves up to the cloud of unknowing, not because we don't take the tradition seriously enough. Most of the people who do atheism for Lent have taken it way too seriously. Many of you have burnt your record collections, or given your money to the church, or become missionaries, or done all sorts of things. You've taken this tradition incredibly seriously, and it's because of that that you have confronted certain contradictions, certain questions, certain doubts. And atheism for Lent then is basically creating a space for you to go more deeply into those, to create space for those in your life, to encourage you to have the courage to take that journey, that narrow route into the dark place. Not so that you despair and lose everything, but perhaps because in going into that space, you will move beyond it to somewhere better, somewhere that is more expansive for you, more life-giving, and that actually might help reinvent the very tradition that you thought you'd left behind. Because here's the weird thing, a non-dialectic no to a religious past means that you're often just as enslaved to it. in that you're always fighting it, you're always angry about it, you're always reading articles about it and shouting and going on social media to fight. In other words, your rejection is still caught up in it. Whereas a dialectic move is where you get beyond it. But weirdly, by getting beyond it, you might end up with a deeper appreciation of it, or a deeper understanding of it, or discovering a type of reformation of it. And these are all ideas that we will explore in greater depth. But Kierkegaard calls it the repetition rather than recollection. Repetition is where you repeat something into the future. You take your past, you repeat it, as in you go deeply into it. You explore it, you rethink it, you re-envision it. And in this taking seriously, you begin to move forward and it becomes transformed in some sort of way. So that's what we're inviting you into. So in a narrow sense, it was really about going, let's have 40 days and let's take Lent. Lent's a perfect example of doing this, because Lent's always about giving something up, letting something go. So why not take Lent as that desert experience in the oasis of our lives, where we go in to that dark night of the soul, that cloud of unknowing, and we see where it leads. But at a wider level, it's beyond merely people who are thinking about their religious traditions. It's about people, all of us, who want to avoid our suffering, or our belief that being famous will make us happy, or being rich will make us happy, or looking a certain way, or being married to a certain person. All of the different ways that we defend ourselves from the darkness, all of the ways that we defend ourselves against the trauma, all of the ways that we defend ourselves against walking the narrow path. This Atheism for Lent is about saying, let's take a bit of time and walk that path, go into it and see what happens. Now, you will find in this course some reflections that you like, some that you don't like, some that will disturb you, some that will leave you cold. Think about it like an album, right? Some songs in an album you like and some you don't. But there will be enough in this, hopefully, to both hopefully enrich your mind, but also to help you in this dialectic journey, so that when we get to the other side, you'll come out of this course maybe having a slightly lighter experience than when you went into it. Maybe having a slightly broader feeling and sense of life than you did when you entered it. I mean, that's what we can hope for, right? So that's what Atheism for Lent is about. It's not about whether you're a theist or an atheist or agnostic or anything like that. Whatever position you're coming from, you will find something in this that will that you agree with, and you will find stuff in this that you will disagree with, and you will find things that disturb you, and you'll find things that comfort you. All I would say is that in this course, think primarily about the things that disturb you. Those are the ones that are really good. Don't worry about agreement and disagreement. You want to find those reflections that actually shift you, that kind of disturb your worldview in some way, that draw out something, that encourage you to go into that dark place. So kind of keep an eye out for those readings. The reflections this week, there's only 4, so because everything kicks off officially really on Sunday. The reflections this week are a form of dialectics. Everything I've said you can see in the various reflections in some small way. So we have 2 Catholic thinkers and we have 2 Jewish thinkers. And all 4 of the people you will encounter take very seriously the tradition that they're in. But all of them, through taking it seriously, have opened up a space for questioning it, for doubting it, and for some of them moving beyond it. So Merrill Westphal is one of the people we'll be looking at. He's actually the person who inspired this course, because he wrote a book called Suspicion and Faith, and the subtitle was Atheism for Lent. And he's a conservative Catholic who loves the Catholic tradition. And it's precisely through his lifelong love of the Catholic tradition that he came to love the works of some of the critics of religion, particularly Freud, Marx, Nietzsche, Feuerbach. And those are the four figures that are the dominant ones in that book. And so, as someone who is very devoutly Catholic, he found himself finding nourishment and insight in those people who many religious thinkers would feel are somehow bad or anti-religious. So I just start off with the introduction to that book as a way both of giving a nod to Westphal, who helped inspire what I do, and also to show you how one person is, through their very fidelity to Catholicism, thinking through and engaging with critics and critiques of religion. Padre Botuma is also deeply embedded in the Catholic tradition. He is a poet and an activist and a writer, a musician who was training to be a priest. And in the music that you'll hear this week, you'll see that it is an incredibly devout piece of music from an album he wrote called Hymns to Swear By, that opens itself up to doubt and questioning and anger. And that this actually is an expression of the Christian faith itself that has room for that. The other two thinkers are Wiesel and Gorecki. Wiesel, it's an excerpt from his reflections while being in a concentration camp in Nazi Germany, where he writes about the experience of the death of God, the loss of God in the experience of the Holocaust. And then that's accompanied by music from Gorecki, who wrote an incredible composition called the Symphony of Sorrowful Songs that is all about separation and loss. And the second movement is based on an experience of I think it's a child separated from his mother in one of the Nazi death camps. So you'll be listening to that. All of these experiences, all of these, the writing, the music, the philosophy that you'll encounter in the next 4 days are a type of expression of critique that comes out of a profound love of and a commitment to the tradition that they are standing in and that they are critiquing. By the way, you'll hear a little bit of noise in the background. I'm trying to ignore it myself, but its neighbours are moving in next door, and I think they're putting in paintings and putting up pictures, etc. So lastly then, just before I finish up, I want to say that some advice for this journey. The first thing I would want to say is, again, don't go into this looking for some sort of intellectual stimulation. You will get that. But don't go into this looking at what you agree with and what you disagree with. But primarily, I would say open yourself up to those reflections that disturb you, that get you to question whatever it is you believe or don't believe. I'd also say that try to lower your defenses. Try to really open yourself up to all of these reflections that you'll be getting thrown your way every day of Lent. And I guess that's pretty much it. I think I've covered everything I want to cover. So basically, this is a dialectic experience where for 40 days you're going to go into the desert of doubt and unknowing. You're going to maybe open yourself up to the questions you have. And I'm going to encourage you, and the readings are going to encourage you to go into the place of doubt, the place of suffering, the place of darkness, the place of death, with the idea that actually that dialectic move into those places are what will bring new confidence, new light, and new life.